Well, welcome everyone to Scottsdale's annual Founders Day celebration. I'm Joan Fadala, a community historian, and it's so great to be celebrating Winfield Scott's and Founders Day at this exact location. And what could be better than being sandwiched in between the Little Red Schoolhouse Scottsdale Historical Society Museum on this side, a location that Winfield Scott, along with his wife Helen and a bunch of VIPs from way back when, dedicated the Little Red Schoolhouse on this exact date in 1910. And then on the other side of our ceremony today is, of course, the beautiful bronze sculpture done by Georgianne Tognani and funded by private citizens, honoring Winfield Scott, his wife Helen, and the mule Old Maud that Winfield Scott brought to Scottsdale after his Army service, and the mule became, of course, Scottsdale's beloved mascot. Scottsdale, of course, observes this Founders Day on Winfield Scott's birthday, February 26th, and he was born in 1837. And okay, if you can't do math quickly like I can't, I'll give you a hint. That was 187 years ago today. And we call it Founders Day, or at least I insist on calling it Founders Day, and that's S apostrophe, because I consider Helen Scott, even though today isn't her birthday, a co-founder of Scottsdale. And together, Helen and Winfield planted so many seeds of the life that we know today, not just because they were very good farmers and ranchers, but because they believed in the future of Scottsdale. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to acknowledge several individuals and groups who have helped sustain this very ceremony year after year after year. First, we couldn't do anything in Scottsdale without our dedicated mayor and Scottsdale City Council, and I'm happy today that we see Mayor David Ortega, Councilman Tom Durham, Councilmember Betty Janik, and I don't know if anybody slipped in that I haven't seen, but we also are always thrilled to have past council members. I know we have Jim Bruner here, we have Linda Milhaven, we have David Smith, and we have Paul Messenger. Have I missed anyone? Also, a group known as the Friends of Winfield Scott began this Founders Day over 3 decades ago, and 3 loyal members of that early Friends of Scottsdale, Winfield Scott group were the Mowry sisters, and 2 or 3 of them are here today, Joanne Handley, Diana Green, and Eleanor Brierley. They certainly, along with their parents and grandparents, made such an impact on Scottsdale and help us remember Winfield Scott. I also want to give very special thanks to the Winfield Scott chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. They've provided refreshments in the past several years for this event and are here again today. And through the DAR's community service, they certainly keep the spirit of community giving back to the community as the Scotts showed us so many years ago. I also want to thank the volunteers of the Scottsdale Historical Society, led so ably by third-generation Scottsdalian Jason Song, and their wonderful group of docents who are going to be happy to give you tours of the museum afterwards, and they are so capably led by their docent coordinator, Terry Erickson, who's been a part of this ceremony for many years as well. So now let's celebrate the life and legacy of Chaplain Winfield Scott. Mayor, would you please come up and offer some tributes?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be introduced by the official historian of Scottsdale, Joan Fadala. You know, it's so fitting that Winfield Scott found a place in the world here in what became known as Scottsdale in Arizona. He knew the fury of war and battle. He was a religious man and survived many wounds. And through that conflict, because he was based in faith and the ministry, returned to the ministry after the Civil War. I'm told that he was wounded 3 times. And in that process, I have friends with the Civil War Roundtable. And one in particular friend gave me Civil War bullets. And I have in my hands, I'm going to pass this around and just let the crowd feel what really Winfield felt. And think about that he survived some of the bloodiest battles in the Civil War. 4 of them are spent and 1 of them is unspent. As we look at today and what we're grateful for in life and how we came to Scottsdale ourselves, I'm just very, very pleased to stand here representing the entire council and also the legacy of Winfield Scott. So I have a proclamation, if you'll bear with me, and I know joyfully as we gather together, and I will be presenting this to the Regent, Sharon Leeser, if you will come up, and then as I read it, we'll present it to your wonderful organization. Hi, Sharon. Great to see you. Okay. Whereas Winfield Scott was born on February 26, 1837, and the city of Scottsdale is named after him for his tireless efforts on behalf of the new town site established near his ranch in 1894, and whereas Winfield Scott, after serving in the Civil War and embarking on a career as a Baptist minister, missionary, and Union Army chaplain throughout the West, came to the Salt River Valley of Arizona Territory to help promote its growth, and whereas Winfield Scott is known for his foresight, adaptability, and care for his community, as evidenced by his effort to establish the Scottsdale School District and the beginnings of tourism and healthcare institutions, and whereas in 1988, the Scottsdale Friends of Winfield Scott initiated the celebration of the birthday of Winfield Scott, and today we continue to celebrate his accomplishments. Therefore, I, David D. Ortega, 12th Mayor of Scottsdale, do proclaim today, February 26, Winfield Scott Day in Scottsdale, and urge our residents to gift to one another friendship as we honor this great man, preacher, scholar, and the founder of Scottsdale.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you. We will put this in a special place.
Fantastic.
Great, thank you.
Go back to you.
I'm feeling a few raindrops, so we'll try to move this along quickly. And what would a birthday party be without having the birthday boy himself make an appearance? So here to offer a couple of observations in the modern day version of Chaplain Winfield Scott, I present Mr. Scott, Reverend Scott, Chaplain Scott himself.
Today I'd like to share a story about a wonderful event that happened on my property that you would say is the northeast corner of Scottsdale and Indian School Road on Thursday, May 19th, 1904. That was the graduation day for the Scottsdale Grammar School. They chose to have a picnic under my orange trees on my farm. Everyone in town, all 75, showed up to celebrate the youngsters' success. The main course of the picnic was a roasted pig provided by Mr. and Mrs. S.T. Fraser, which was excellent. There was music provided by the children and speeches provided by such notables as school trustee Werner Vanderhoof and Mrs. Wilfred Hayden, who thanked the teacher who was retiring. You may know Mrs. Hayden because she's part of the Hayden family for whom Hayden Road is named. The president of the school board of trustees, Mrs. H.L. Underhill, was in New York tending to her sick mother, so trustee George Blount took her place and awarded the graduation certificates to the 8th graders, including his son, Winfield Blount. At that time, Mr. Blount was the principal of the Phoenix Union School. His wife, Alza, was one of the first teachers of Scottsdale Grammar School, which began in 1896, several years before our Little Red Schoolhouse was built. She was paid $40 per month by 7 families and had students in the one-room school. And it was her retirement that Mrs. Hayden was acknowledging. A fine young woman named Mrs. Jane Vanderhoof recited a poem that day, adapted from a poem about another town, originally written by James Whitcomb Riley, who you may know as the author of Little Orphan Annie. I suppose I should explain a few references so you'll understand them. Back in 1904, our postmaster and operator of the general store, a man named Ward Dunstan, sold his business to a most agreeable woman named Sarah Caldwell Thomas, who was recently widowed. She was our first lady business owner and was appointed our first postmistress. We didn't have a drugstore until many years after I died, but we had a general store with groceries, a post office, clothing, and other provisions. Despite my being a chaplain during my years in the military, there was no dedicated church in Scottsdale while I was alive. We worshiped in the basement of the Little Red Schoolhouse once it was built, which was big enough to fit the entire town. My wife Helen arranged for a Baptist church to be built on Indian School and Buckboard Trail after I died. And today that church, the First Baptist Church of Scottsdale, is located at Osborne and 70th Street. Now that you know that information, it's time to share a wonderful poem that hasn't been heard in Scottsdale for 120 years. It's called The Little Town of Scottsdale. You can boast about your cities with their steady growth and size, and brag about your county seats and business enterprise, and railroads and factories and all such foolery, but the little town of Scottsdale is good enough for me. You can harp about your churches with their steeples in the clouds, and gas about your graded streets, and blow about your crowds. You can talk about your theaters and all you've got to see, but the little town of Scottsdale is good enough for me. There ain't no style in our town, it's little like and small. There ain't no churches neither, just a meeting house is all. There's no sidewalks to speak of, but the highway's always free, and the little town of Scottsdale is wide enough for me. Some finds it discommodin' like, I'm willing to admit, to have one post office and a woman keepin' it, and a drugstore and the shoe shop and grocery, all 3. But the little town of Scottsdale show enough for me. You can smile and turn your nose up, and joke and have your fun, and laugh and holler, but Scottsdale's better than none. If the city suits you better, why, it's where you ought to be. But the little town of Scottsdale is good enough for me. Thank you. If you'd like a copy of that poem, I asked a young man over there at the City of Scottsdale table to make them available. So thank you for coming to my 187th birthday, the 136th anniversary of Helen and I purchasing the 640 acres here in 1888, the 114th anniversary of the opening of the Little Red Schoolhouse in 1910. At that time, I was honored to have the town named after me. All these years later, I'm just gushing with pride about all the things you have done to make Scottsdale into Arizona's preeminent community. Thank you.
Wow, what a great poem. We are so lucky that many years ago, the city hired an historian, Dick Lynch, to do Winfield Scott's biography. And I always have to remind you every year that this is truly Chaplain Scott, the other Bible of Scottsdale. And if you haven't read it, you really should, except for the fact that now you'll know where Winfield and Marsh and I get all of our remarks from. Right, Lois? Oh. Because I feel a few raindrops, I'll make my remarks about Winfield Scott more brief than I had planned. But, you know, with Chaplain Scott being a man of the cloth and also with a wonderful singing voice known to belt out a lot of hymns, we don't really know what hymn was his favorite. But if I could pick a hymn and slightly reword it to describe our co-founder and namesake, it would be, "What a friend we have in Winfield." As the mayor said at the end of his proclamation, one of the things that Winfield Scott and Helen were known for were their wide variety of friendships. And although he was described in many places as a short, broad, bald-headed man with a white beard, he was mostly known for his charisma, and he was a charmer, he was a promoter, an encourager, a storyteller, with a generous spirit and beloved by the kids in town because every year, unbeknownst to them really who was behind that red suit, he played Santa every year when the town gathered in the Little Red Schoolhouse and its predecessor, the old wooden school. We know them for starting many industries, which, with the help of their friends, tourism that they helped start with their friends, the Underhills, in starting the first guest house in Scottsdale, and for taking in health seekers on their ranch. That certainly started our healthcare industry. And I found an article in the November 1897 edition of the Arizona Republican that showed how the Scots' infectious, friendly spirit impacted the whole town. The article said in part, I quote, "Scottsdaleites are a satisfied set. There is not a kicker among them. They enjoy each other. They enjoy the pure air, the good water, and the beautiful mountain views. They enjoy everything. It is doubtful if you could get even one of them to find fault, even with an unfriendly sandstorm," unquote. And again, he had so many friends, and so did Helen, that started the traditions, the industries, and the friendships that we still enjoy today in Scottsdale. One particular friendship I want to point out is that when he and Helen decided to buy that plot of land, before he finalized that deal, he went across to the chief of the Salt River Pima tribe and asked his permission to become his neighbor. And from then on, not only the Scots, but all of the early residents relied on their neighbors and friends on the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community to help them learn how to adapt to living and thriving in the Sonoran Desert. Again, I could list so many other friends and colleagues, many of whom Winfield Scott mentioned in that from that school graduation event that he described. But perhaps you've been reading recently about Scottsdale's new Blue Zones community effort. And one of the guiding principles, the 9 power points of the Blue Zones, is to create a social network and to create one that can take you through the rest of your life. Well, as a military family, it was hard for the Scotts to maintain a social network from cradle to grave, but everywhere they went, they quickly made friends, and they certainly did here. So I think that, although I can't put words or ideas into the late Winfield Scott's mind, I'm sure that he would be so pleased that throughout the years we in Scottsdale value our friendships, and also that now that we're striving to be known as a Blue Zone community, that we think that having social networks and friendships are a vital part of living in Scottsdale. So speaking of friends, one of our best friends ever for decades, particularly at this event, is our dear Marsh Trimble, Scottsdale's friend and resident, but also Arizona's official historian for decades. And I had the honor and pleasure in December of watching Governor Hobbs reappoint Marsh as again in his continuing role as Scottsdale's, as Arizona's official historian. So, Marsh, will you come up and say a few words?
Thank you, Joan. It's a pleasure to be here today again. There have been so many, I've told you so many stories about Winfield Scott that I've been really stretched to come up with something new. And I thought, well, maybe I might try to slip in General Winfield Scott and see if you catch it. And then I thought, how about Randolph Scott? No, that wouldn't work either. So I wasn't going to try to fool you this morning, and I just want, I was born in Tempe on a little farm actually out in Kyrene, and at the time Kyrene consisted of a little school that my mother attended, and a gas station, and I think a grocery store. That's about all I remember of it, because we moved around a lot when I was a kid. Because, well, it was still the Great Depression, so we were always looking for a place to live. But anyhow, my fondest memories are by the way, my grandparents moved over here in 1926, all the way from Tempe. And so I think they were, I guess you could call it, but, and they stayed about 10 years and then moved back to Scottsdale. But they were typical of the families that come out here. One family, my mother's family, the Rogers, came to Tempe for tuberculosis, and the other came to Tempe from Texas, Del Rio, Texas, for asthma. So the two greatest things that brought most people to Arizona, I got both of them. And I was lucky. Did not have any tuberculosis in my veins, nor any asthma. And one of the few members of the family that can say I wasn't cursed by that. So neuropathy got me later in life. It's waiting to find something on me, I guess. But anyhow, I remember one of the rites of passage for a youngster in those days, whether it was a boy or a girl, when Daddy took a Honda. That's the end of the rope that has a little loop in it that you make a loop to make a rope, because on a farm you want to be a roper, and that's one of the things that you couldn't wait. You knew you were coming of age when Daddy gave you a little rope to play with. So I got my rope, and I was looking around for things to rope around the place, and first I tried calves. And I roped a calf, and it dragged me all over the barn yard, and that didn't work. And so I thought, well, I'll try a dog. The family dog was always there out there just moping around with nothing to do, and I thought I'll rope the dog. So after that one try at that, every time I'd come out in the yard with a rope in my hand, the dogs would go get under a car or something, and so I thought, okay, cats. I'll get the cat. And so I went after the cat. And the cats learned quickly that when Marshall comes with that rope, get up in a tree. He cannot rope you in a tree. Well, I never got, much later, even when I was living out here on Mummy Mountain, I tried to rope a rattlesnake one time. I thought, I saw Will Rogers do that on film, not a snake, but a mouse. And I thought, if Will Rogers, my idol, can rope a snake, a mouse, I ought to be able to rope a rattlesnake. So one crept into the garage one day, and I got out there, and my wife was down by the swimming pool in her bikini bathing suit, and I was out there and just a bathing suit and a pair of boots and a hat, and I thought, I've got to rope this rattlesnake. And she was pretty young, and so I just said, come up here and taunt that snake and make him raise his head so I can rope him. And so and she actually did it. She came out there and she just did that to the snake, and of course the snake raises up out of curiosity more than anything, and I tossed that loop. But if any of you have ever tried to rope a snake, it doesn't work, because you get the loop out there and on him, and he pulls his head right out of it, just like that. So I gave up instantly and picked him up and turned him loose on top of Mummy Mountain and sent him over back to the other side, to the other side of the mountain, and get the rich neighbors over there. But anyhow, with those learning to rope, it was quite a thing. I still have fond memories of those days, and it reminded me of a cowboy poem. And I know Joan said I was going to recite some poetry for you here today, and the only culture thing I can probably do is agriculture, but I thought I had a old friend, Baxter Black, and Baxter passed away a couple of years ago, way before his time, and but he wrote a poem I really liked, and Joe Beeler, I'm not name dropping on you, but Joe Beeler was a good friend, and he told me one time, he said, Marshall, the difference between cowboy poetry and real poetry is that you don't have to have the artist stand in front of you and tell you. It's a lot. He said he compared it to Western art. He said, in Western art, you don't have to have somebody, the artist, stand next to the painting and tell you what's in it. And I thought, that's cowboy poetry, cowboy archery. And so I think cowboy poetry is about the same thing. So I thought, if you'll bear with me, I'll do one of my favorites, and because I realized when out there when I was roping the cat and the dog and the rattlesnake and the calf, I tried everything, and I realized then that there was one critter on the farm that was dumber than me, and that was a chicken. And so I went out there and I started roping chickens. Of course, they have little heads too. They can pull them right out of the loop too, so you can't hurt them. And but I figured, like I said, they were the only thing on the barnyard that was dumber than me. So we recite this for you, God willing, and the creek don't rise and it doesn't rain. Everyone says they love chicken, ambrosia sent from above. But nobody loves a chicken, because a chicken ain't easy to love. It's hard to housebreak a chicken. They don't make very good pets. Well, you might teach them some bird imitations, but that's about as good as it gets. Mentally, they're plumb lightheaded, and they can't be confused with the facts. That's why there's no seeing-eyed chickens. Guard chickens are trained chicken acts. And everything tastes like chicken, from rattlesnake meat to fried bats. It's got this anonymous flavor. I figure they're all Democrats. They say this ignoble creature, with its intellect unrefined and its lack of civilized manners, has little to offer mankind. But let me suggest that the chicken has two contributions to make. The first one is the pecking order, and the second, the chicken fried steak. Thank you all very much.
Don't go away. Don't go away. Marsh, before I say another word, I have to tell you, thanks a lot for that mental image I'm never going to get rid of you standing in the barn just in a bathing suit and your cowboy boots. TMI.
It's a true story. I can verify that.
Mayor Ortega, will you come and stand on Marsh's side as I make this announcement? It's kind of a pre-announcement. But Marsh, you've been the mighty oak in your decades of service to Scottsdale and Arizona history. You've inspired countless students to branch out into history careers or loving history. And we can't let you leave this event without a special form of recognition. So the city of Scottsdale and the thousands of Trimble troops would like to honor you by planting a tree in your honor. We haven't decided on the location, but chances are it's going to be across from Coronado High School in El Dorado Park, so that it's a place that you created so much inspiration. If that doesn't work out, it might be here at the Civic Center, but we're hoping that maybe around Arbor Day we'll reconvene and plant this tree, the Marshall Trimble tree, again, the mighty oak of Scottsdale. And also, for everybody that's here and has a love of our great Arizona historian, be sure and stop over at the table and get a sticker that shows how much you love and respect Marshall. You get the first two.
Look at that.
And while you're over at the table, be sure and get a commemorative bookmark that has a quote from both Winfield Scott and Helen Scott on it. Again.
And one last thing, whoever has the pouch with the 5 bullets, please see me afterwards. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you, Jay.
I do want to give a few more thank yous, and we'll let Marsh go back to his chair of honor, which we brought out here. We thank you so much to Marsh Trimble, to Winfield Scott, to Mayor Ortega for your remarks today. We couldn't do this ceremony without you. Again, I want to thank the DAR Winfield Scott chapter for providing the refreshments, for Dan Miller and his crew from Parks and Recreation for setting up our area today. Also from Parks and Recreation, I want to thank Dwayne Chapa and Eric Ibsen for helping us determine where to plant Marshall's tree. Thanks to the city's Community Engagement and Citizen Services group for helping organize today's ceremonies along with the Historical Society. And this is a different one. I want to thank the owners of the Old Town Tavern in the back door for keeping the noise and the music at a minimum while we have this ceremony. And again, I want to remind you that throughout the year we have so many opportunities to celebrate Scottsdale history. First of all, you can visit the Great Spring Training exhibit inside the Little Red Schoolhouse Museum, or come back throughout the year as the exhibits change and you can learn more about Scottsdale history. You can browse the books and publications in the Scottsdale Heritage Connections Messenger Family Research Room at Civic Center Library. You can enjoy over 10,000 digital historic images and oral histories on the library's website that is done in collaboration with the Little Red Schoolhouse, the Historical Museum. You can watch history videos on the Scottsdale's and the library's YouTube channel. You can visit Scottsdale's Museum of the West, which is truly a treasure in our downtown. You can tour the museum and the train depots and trains at the historic McCormick-Stillman Railroad Park. You can go down the street and enjoy the Rodeo Museum. Go to Taliesin West. Again, we are so blessed to have a variety of historic resources here, and many of them, like the Little Red Schoolhouse, are free, so be sure and go there. And again, if you're a Scottsdale resident, Thursday nights at the Museum of the West are also free. So with that, I don't want to stand in the way between you, lemonade, and cupcakes. So happy birthday, Winfield Scott. Happy birthday to the founders, Helen and Winfield Scott. And we'll see you back here again next year.